Good morning, everyone. We're going to give it a minute or two for people to hop on in before we get into the content, but thanks for being here. Good morning again for those who are just hopping in right now. I'm waiting for the participant list entries to start slowing down before we get started, so maybe another minute or so. Alrighty, it is 10:01. I think the entry list is slowing down a little bit, so we'll go ahead and get started in the interest of time. So thank you all for being here and joining us today to learn more about the FY26 renewal information session that we're holding today. Just so everyone knows that this session does pertain to all three of our renewal grants. So that's CSVS, VSS, and SAFEPLAN. There are, of course, differences between the three procurements, and we'll indicate when those do occur. But for the most part, the information that we share will pertain to all three of them. For those who don't already know me, my name is Ashley Renich-Malik. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm the Grants Administration Specialist at MOVA in charge of procurement. I'm going to go over some logistics real quickly, just so we're all on the same page. We're currently recording, so this session will be available after the fact. We'll post it and you'll have all of that information. This is a Zoom webinar, so you cannot be seen or heard as audience members, but you can see us, the presenters, and the presentation, I hope. If you have questions during the presentation, please use the Q&A section instead of chat. That will help us keep track of everything. We'll answer everything, and we'll also be documenting those to share after the fact. So I know you have good questions. We want to make sure that they're both answered and documented for other participants either today or in the future. We have some planned questions for the end of the presentation, but then we'll also take your questions both throughout and at the end of the presentation. If you have tech issues throughout today, please use the chat function, not Q&A. You can use the all panelists selection, and then we'll be happy to assist you, of course. And then we are going to move on to our introductions. So like I said, my name is Ashley Renich-Malik. I am the Grants Administration Specialist, and I use she, her pronouns. And I'll kick it to Kristen.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. I'm Kristen Nguyen, Director of Grants Administration, and I use she, her pronouns. Kristen Tavano.
Good morning, everyone. I am Kristen Tavano. I am the Deputy Director of Grants Administration at MOVA. I use she, her pronouns, and I will pass it over to Liam.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Liam Lowney. I'm the Executive Director of MOVA, and I use he, him, his pronouns, and it's wonderful to be with you all. Thank you for joining us again on this lovely rainy Tuesday. Thanks for sharing some time with us. I was going to kick us off here and just say welcome to you. And this is the annual update on kind of where we stand on funding. I think some of you may have had an opportunity to see a brief webinar we did about funding and how we're budgeting, and that is a constantly evolving and constantly changing thing. And so we just are going to continue to tell you things. And I apologize to the extent any of it is a repeat, but it's really important to us that you know the information that we have when we have it. And so, but along the way, please don't ever hesitate to reach out to us to find out the status of state and federal funds, and if there are ways for you to help and advocate. So, as you know by now, our largest source of funding historically was from the Victims of Crime Act. And that funding, federal funding source has been on the decline. And while The Crime Victims Fund itself and the awards coming to all of us states have been declining over a number of years. So many of you supported our advocacy efforts to secure the VOCA Bridge funding. And thanks to that partnership, we were able to secure $60 million over the course of 3 years, so $20 million a year for the past 3 years from the state legislature to supplement the funds that we have available. And that was what, we coined the VOCA Bridge, and we had hoped we were bridging the period of time for the Crime Victims Fund to reboot and rebound, and it hasn't happened yet. But, so that 3-year effort was a temporary solution, but we are going to continue to advocate for additional investments to support grant awards moving forward, because we're still in the need to support the important work that you're doing. So we're looking at multiple methods to try to increase funding so that we can get programs the funding that you need. So specific to FY26, the grant renewal awards that we're doing this coming year, across all MOVA grant recipients, FY26 is going to be a 1-year grant renewal. With the funding we currently have available, we currently anticipate experiencing a 10% overall reduction in the funding that we can make available for programming in Massachusetts. So it's important to understand that the aggregate amount of funding, it's going to be 10% less than last year. That does not mean that every agency is going to receive a 10% reduction to their award. Some may not receive a reduction, some may receive a 10% or more or less. But overall, the amount of funding that we have available based on the money we have right now, it will be 10% less for this coming grant year. I hope that makes sense, and I want to make sure we're giving you accurate information. So if it doesn't make sense to you, please let us know. It's important to state, as we always do, that this isn't adequate. It's not adequate for you to do the work that you do. It is not adequate considering that there have been reductions the past several years, let alone they haven't been level funding, which we all know it costs more for you to run your program now than it did last year or the year before that. And so we are mindful of that, and that's why we continue to advocate for more funding to try to support the important work you're doing. And as I always say, the amount of money that we put into these grants is no reflection of that important work. It is a reflection of the funding we have available. But with that being said, we continue to plan to work with you to try to stabilize that funding this year and in the years to come. So a few things that are going on. There's currently federal legislation pending that's looking to stabilize the Crime Victims Fund, and MOVA's committed to continuing to advocate for that at the federal level, and we've been working nationally with our partners to support that effort. We will continue to work with state lawmakers to try to support funding for programming here in Massachusetts, because I know they care about the work that you do. You support the constituents that they all serve every day, and it's important that they continue to hear your voice about the important work you do. And we will certainly continue to tell them how necessary that work is. So we will continue to work for more additional funding to sustain your services. So in addition to advocating for funding and trying to figure out creative solutions around funding, we recently engaged with Root Cause, which is a nonprofit consulting organization, to guide a stakeholder engagement effort across the state. You may have, and I hope have, seen some information from us on that. And what we really need to know from you is how you're doing your work, and how we can understand your funding priorities and the needs of survivors in your community. We want to take that information back to ensure that what we implement in FY27 in particular is thoughtful of the input that you can share with us about how you make funding decisions, about how you support fund the services that within your organizations. We recognize, focusing on the folks at the front end. As an example, if we only focus on the advocates at the front door and lose sight of the fact that your agencies are trying to just keep the lights on and keep a place for survivors to show up, we're missing the boat. We need to have nuanced conversations with you to make sure we really understand about what you need and how we can use the requirements of our funding to best support you in that. So I hope if you haven't already, you will sign up for one of these listening sessions and have an opportunity or participate in the survey that's going to be coming out soon. And it should be noted that oftentimes we use the survey first to try to help inform the discussions that you're going to have. And so please, it's helpful if you do both and not either or, but I understand your time is limited. So those are some of the things going on our end. And as always, please reach out to us if you have questions on how we can support you, your work, your grants, and trying to basically help you do what you do best, which is meet the needs of survivors at your door. So thanks for being here today. I hope you have a happy new year if I don't see you before then. And with that, I'm going to pass it back to Ashley.
Thanks, Liam. All right, so with that context, we're going to talk about the procurement at hand. So today, the two big topics will be the content of the applications, and then of course at the end we'll talk about our prepared FAQ and then open the Q&A for you all as well. So let's get into it. So what we're looking at here is a timeline you're probably already familiar with, but as a reminder, we are in the info session today. In January, after the holidays, we'll be having two different TA sessions, one for CSVS and one specific to VSS and SAFEPLAN. The CSVS providers meeting registration will have been provided to you by your program coordinator, Latasia. The VSS and SAFEPLAN technical assistance session can be signed up using the link in the materials we've sent out. I think will also be ending up in the chat. Sorry, I forgot to move my notes and I lost my train of thought. So with that, we'll be taking questions until January 27th. So we take your questions, we answer them, and then we post them weekly so that everyone has the same information. The information will be on both Combis and our website. We'll have the final list of questions posted by January 28th, and then the deadline for submitting the grant will be February 4th, 2025 at noon. That feels like ages from now, but I know it will come quickly. As we all know, the applications will be submitted via eGrants, and then the timeline functions like it has the past few years. In the spring, the Victim and Witness Assistance Board meeting will occur and they'll vote on the awards. In the spring, we'll also do contracting. I do notice that it says FY24 here, but of course we're talking about FY26. As you can see, the timeline is pretty similar year to year. And then in July, the grants will start, and in the following June, the grants will end. So pretty straightforward there. At this time, I'm going to pass the mic over to Kristen Wen to talk more about the content of the procurement.
Thank you, Ashley. So this slide here reiterates a little bit of the information that Liam had previously shared. So this procurement for all of our grant funding streams operates for 1 year. So this will be state fiscal year 2026. So July 1st, 2025 through June 30th, 2026. And as far as the funding availability goes, for the culturally specific victim services grant, this will be year 4 of the grant renewal for this specific procurement and grant funding stream. We do anticipate offering level funding via FOCA dollars and supplemental state funding. For SAFEPLAN, we anticipate between 3.6 to 4.1 also through a mix of VOCA, SAFEPLAN, and supplemental state funding. Sorry, it looked like something just popped on the screen. And then lastly, for VSS, it will be between 29 to 34 million, which reflects that anticipated 10% decrease that Liam was just talking about. And one thing too that I would note when applying for renewal funding via eGrants is to ensure that you're applying through the correct application. So there will be these 3 different application options in eGrants, but only folks who have received the CSVS, the Culturally Specific Grant Services, previously for the last 4 years will be or the past 3 years rather, would be eligible to reapply for year 4 of the funding. If you're a current SAFEPLAN grant recipient, you would be eligible to apply for the SAFEPLAN grant, and for the Victim and Survivor Services VSS grant, if you are a current recipient of that funding stream, you'll be eligible to reapply through that application in eGrants. One of the requirements of receiving VOCA funding is that it's more so a requirement on MOVA as the recipient of VOCA funding, but the federal guidelines require that each state that receives VOCA funding must allocate a minimum of 10% towards priority areas. And those 4 priority areas are child abuse, domestic violence, sexual assault, and previously underserved priority categories. So the 4 categories that you can see here on the screen are culturally specific populations, survivors of homicide victims, persons with disabilities, and LGBTQIA plus populations. So starting with the FY23 grant renewal, so this would be a few years since we have updated our priority category definition of underserved victims. We expanded the definition to include culturally specific populations, persons with disabilities, and LGBTQ plus populations as well. So while this is a requirement of receiving VOCA funding, as many of you know, as many of you have experienced over the past several years, we are likely to move forward with a braided funding model moving forward. So you may receive from MOVA different streams of funding. So you may receive solely VOCA funding, or you may have a mix of state funding and VOCA funding. But despite this being a VOCA requirement specifically, we strive to allocate or to ensure that the minimum of 10% funding that we receive in all different funding sources meets these requirements, and that we are funding a diverse set of programming and ensuring that funding is spread across different categories and different victimization types. So the following reflects what you can find in the request for grant applications and what our funding priorities will look like given funding decreases. So we will look to see if applications and budget requests are prioritizing direct service staff and personnel costs, administrative management staff that are necessary to manage the funded award. So that could be supervisors, data managers. We see various different types of positions on the budget that helps support the activities of the grant funded services. Client emergency expenses. So this can be hotel expenses, any other expenses that may come up. Occasionally we see gift cards, which I will talk about momentarily as well. So whatever that may look like for your program and the population that you support. Other essential costs for the delivery of victim services. So this is a broader category. So if that means rent for your program, that is something that we will consider when reviewing the grant application. And then lastly, for SAFEPLAN agencies that are on this webinar today, it is expected that SAFEPLAN agencies continue to serve all currently designated courts. So if you have any questions about that, feel free to reach out to myself or Ashley or Latasia as your program coordinator. Thank you. So this is a new, something new, new language that you likely have seen in the request for grant applications, and something eventually too that will be reflected in the grants policies and procedures manual. So this will be updated come FY26. And really it's just putting some more parameters around the spend down in budgeting of the grants. So for staff bonuses, if you intend to request staff bonuses as part of your MOVA funded grant, we are expecting moving forward that it will be included in the original budget and approved by MOVA during contracting. So if that is something that you foresee requesting come the end of the year or December, whenever, if that happens in your organization, we would expect that it is included in the initial grant application. And bonuses that are requested through a budget amendment during the fiscal year may not be approved. And this is, again, a way for MOVA to forecast the funding spend down in a time of funding reductions to really kind of plan out what reversion may look like, what long-term spending may look like. So having these types of requests in the initial budget is helpful for us in our forecasting of funding availability. And similar to the effect of staff bonuses, gift cards is another piece that we're looking to set additional parameters around. So gift cards for emergency client assistance, we are asking that it's requested in the original budget and approved by MOVA during contracting. And if your program does intend to include it later on in the fiscal year, it is expected that it will be included prior to the final quarter of the fiscal year. So that would be in the spring of 2025 and prior to the last 3 months of the grant. So then again, that allows for better planning of the spending of the grant. And one aspect too about gift cards, and if you've included gift cards in your budget in prior years, you likely have heard this from your program coordinators, but gift cards must be spent encumbered and given to any participants of your program by the end of the fiscal year, so by June 30th. And if there's any leftover gift cards come the following fiscal year in July 1st moving forward, that may be considered cash on hand. So we always, anytime we see an influx of gift card purchases at the end of the fiscal year, we need to ensure that those have all been distributed to the victims and survivors that you support. And the slide here has the date, specifically April 1st of 2025. If you intend to request gift cards for your MOVA funded grant, please do so before April 1st. Lastly, before I pass it to Kristen Tavano, just a few notes about match. So once again, we will be issuing a blanket waiver of the match requirement, and this will be applied for all organizations receiving MOVA funding. So whether you are funded through the culturally specific grant, victims and survivor services grant, or SAFEPLAN, this blanket waiver will be automatic. If you are reapplying for renewal funding for CSVS or VSS, you may opt, if you choose to report match, you can opt out of the blanket waiver in eGrants. And for SAFEPLAN, if you would like to opt out of the blanket waiver, we haven't built the capacity in eGrants for SAFEPLAN applicants to opt out of this, so you can email MOVA grants. I would encourage everybody to opt into this blanket waiver. There are no penalties for opting into the blanket waiver. We have recently updated our match waiver policy, which has been approved by our federal funders at the Office for Victims of Crime. And the flexibility that we have in our policy allows for this continued waiver in a time of a challenging funding picture. So we encourage everybody to opt into this. frankly, it is less reporting on your end. But if you choose to report match, and if that is something you would like to continue to or opt into reporting to MOVA, you have that option, and you can select so in eGrants. And with that, I will pass it to Kristen Tavano to go through some of the combis and application logistics.
Thanks, Kristen. Good morning again, everybody. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the RGAs and how to access our documents on combis. So I'll start off talking about the request for grant applications, or the RGA as we call it. That is our instruction manual and yours for the grant renewal. Both the Victim and Survivor Services, VSS, and SAFEPLAN funded agencies have their own individual RGAs, but the Culturally Specific Victim Services, or CSVS funded agencies, have an application guide, which will serve as the instruction manual for their renewal application. Both the VSS and the SAFEPLAN RGAs are available on our website and on combis. And for the CSVS programs, we provided you with the application guide in the emails that were sent to you with your option to renew letters back on December 4th. So again, the combis information is just for the VSS and the SAFEPLAN funded agencies. And while we do have all of this information and RGAs available on our website, we also want to make sure that you know how to access it on combis. A reminder that, again, this year you'll be completing and submitting your renewal application on eGrants, but because we are a state agency, we must post all of our funding opportunities on combis, which is the Commonwealth's procurement site. So if you haven't already been to the combis website, you can find our bids for the VSS and SAFEPLAN 26 grant renewals by visiting the link at the top of this slide. And I believe somebody is going to throw that into the chat for you. But we've also provided hyperlinks to combis at many points in our recent messaging that has gone out with some of our timelines. Next slide, please. So from the homepage of combis, thank you, Kristen, for dropping that into the chat. What you want to do is scroll down to the bottom, and under supplier activities, you want to click on open bids, which is the middle icon that you see on the screen. And then a new page will appear. What you'll want to do is click advanced search, which is arrow number 1 at the top of the screen. It's in the upper left-hand corner of the page. And then an additional set of fields will open up. You'll want to go to where arrow number 2 is, which is the organization box. And as soon as you start typing victim and witness, you won't even get very far, and Victim and Witness Assistance Board will pop up. I think we're one of the only ones with the letter V. And then option number 3, arrow number 3 down at the bottom, you want to click search. And then after clicking search, you'll want to look for the bid number that matches the opportunity you're looking for. And we've listed the bid numbers for the VSS and the SAFEPLAN renewals at the bottom of this slide so that you can be sure that you're looking at the correct one. But we've also made it clear that it should say fiscal year 26 VSS and fiscal year 26 SAFEPLAN. And with that, I will hand it over to Ashley, and I will be back later. Thanks.
Thanks, Kristen and Kristen. All right, so we're going to talk about the eGrants side of things. So I'm going to go back and forth in between slides, which of course will be provided to you after the fact as well, so you can refer back to them. But then I'll also be doing some demonstration on the shared site. For those of you who don't already know this or aren't super familiar with these types of presentations, I do use what we call the eGrants shared site, which is the testing site that we use to make sure that everything works on the live site, which is what you will use. So there'll be some differences in between the two sites, but the steps, the functions, the buttons will primarily be the same. And where there are differences, I will call attention to those, just so you're not looking for something that I'm showing you now or are in these screenshots and you're not seeing it on the live site. So a little disclaimer there. So at the top, we have eGrants, the site, which is where all the applications will be initiated, submitted, reviewed, continued. I think everyone has used eGrants at this point, or each grant has at least used eGrants at this point. We have a ton of support materials, which I believe have been put into the chat or will be soon, including a step-by-step guide, which I do want to note is specific to all three of the procurements. In the past, we have done separate step-by-step guides because, again, the steps are primarily the same between the three. And we'll point out where there are exceptions. There's just the one step-by-step guide that has the literal step-by-step instructions of how to complete this process as well. So the only users that can initiate an application on eGrants are initiate, work on, and submit are application submitter, agency administrator, or authorized representative. Before you or your colleagues start to go work on the application, please ensure that you have one or more of those roles, preferably just one. eGrants gets confused sometimes. And if you don't, either someone who has one of those roles at your agency can assign that to you, or you can reach out to your program coordinator to assist with getting you the correct role. So once you have one of those roles, you'll log in and see the FY26 applications in My Opportunities, which we're seeing here on this screenshot. This is the time in which I'm going to transfer over to the shared site and walk through some of this content. So I'm going to be logging in with my agency administrator role. So I have one of those. And then on here, you're going to see a plethora of different opportunities. Of course, we're not applying for FY25 anymore. These are just in here. So we can continue testing them and making updates as we see fit. But what you all will be seeing will be these FY26 applications. So we're seeing CSVS application, FY26, SAFEPLAN, and VSS. So these are one of the spots where you're seeing more in My Opportunities in the test site than you will see in the live site. So in our example, both on the screenshots and the example that we'll do now, we'll use the CSVS application. Please note that if you are not a CSVS current grantee, you will not be a CSVS grantee in the FY26 year, so don't click here. If you do accidentally do that, it happens all of the time. It's totally fine. Just ignore the application and go and work on your current, the one that's applicable to you. So if that does occur, we'll delete all the wrong applications at the end of the procurement process, but you can just ignore it and move on. Infamously, eGrants likes to be slow when we're presenting things. So when you do click on the button, it hopefully will occur faster for you than it did for me. You'll receive this pop-up. Your agency's name will be here. Of course, we're a test agency. So we're just going to click proceed. It will auto-refresh you into the application, and you'll see this document landing page where a bunch of juicy information will exist. So you'll see the application that you're working on up here. You'll see your document names. It's usually, this is like a bunch of random things, right? But this will usually include your grant type, the fiscal year, part of your agency's name, and then whatever random number eGrants assigns to you. It will have your role. So we see that I'm an agency administrator, which is one of the roles that needs to be had in order to work on this. And then there's this application in process status. So this is going to be the status that means the ball is in your court and you're working on the application. There's various other statuses that we hit throughout the year, which you're probably already familiar with, but we'll get to the submission statuses later on. So I'm going to go back into the slide so we can talk about the different components of the application without having to do the whole thing. So that will be here. Ooh. We initiated the application, and now we're seeing the different components of the application here. So we have the application questions that will include the match waiver section if you're CSVS or VSS, which Kristen talked about previously, and then the program narrative questions. And those are specific to each grant. So go ahead and refer to either your application eGrants or your RGA or application guide document for what those entail. Everyone has the organizational questionnaire. Fill that out as you see fit with the applicable information for your organization. If you are applying to VSS and SAFEPLAN, there are times in which some of that information might be different from program to program. So just fill that out specific to the program that you're completing that respective application for. We have the court coverage agreement, which is for SAFEPLAN only. So we won't see it in our example today with CSVS, but you will see that if you're completing a SAFEPLAN application, and in the step-by-step guide, there is a section specific to the court coverage agreement. It's not changed over the past number of years, but the instructions for that will be in both of those places for SAFEPLAN. And then there's the budget request, which I'll put a pin in right now because we're going to go a little bit more deeply into some of the pages on the budget request, but that's, the meat of the application. We'll talk about that in a moment. We have the upload section, which I think only exists for VSS. Uploads, there are no upload requirements unless you're a pass-through. There's only 2 potential applicants, which this would apply to. You know who you are. That's where the subcontract information would be uploaded. So if you are not one of those 2, if you do not have those pass-through privileges, awards, you will not be using the upload section. So don't stress about that. And then there's the contact information section, which I also put an asterisk on. This is a vital, super important part of the application, but it does not exist within the application. So it's I oftentimes forget it, which is why there's an asterisk there. We'll talk a lot more about that as well. But saying here now for the first time, and probably 5 more times, that the contact information page section is super important and required. If it's not completely filled out, your application will be considered incomplete. So we're going to go back into eGrants and look at this help page, which is not one of the sections I had pointed to before. That's because it's not a required section, but instead a help section. This is a page that we started putting on various eGrants processes during, I think we started in FY24. You're seeing more in FY25, but we're really trying to go gung-ho on it with FY26 and making sure our processes have these components. So at the top of your application, you'll see this just help page. It'll be one of these empty check boxes initially, and then it'll automatically check itself. Don't worry about that. It's not ever going to be required. It just has the information that we think is key to completing the application. So the information that you see here for CSVS will be probably identical to what you'll see for VSS and SAFEPLAN, but you're seeing like these are the steps, these are the rules that you have to have in order to do the application, these are the components. We have some eGrants tips. I'll be using these shortly when we get into the budget request forms, but the tips are also listed here. Contact information, this is going to be something I hammer home today, and then submission information. And then we have our resources down here at the end. So if you ever feel like MOVA is sending you too many things and different things exist on various different websites, you can also see the most key information on the help page, which exists within your application. I hope this means fewer button clicking and having fewer tabs open trying to get this work done. So if you have any questions about that, or if there's suggestions about what else could be included in here, I'm open to that, but this exists for everyone. So the next piece we talked about the help page. The next piece is the application questions. So we already talked about the match component before. You'll either opt in or opt out, and then there's program narrative questions. For CSVS and VSS, we have one question that's required. That's the program narrative question. You'll see the specific instructions for that when you complete the application. And then for all 3 grants, we have these 3 questions, asking if there's any planned budgetary changes, if there's been reversion, or if there is planned reversion. We ask you to explain that, and then a question about vacancies, either over the past year or in the proposed budget. So again, the specifics to those are in the RGAs, the application guide, and the actual application. So we won't get into the nitty-gritty of that. But of course, if you have questions, you can feel free to reach out about that. Next is the organizational questionnaire. I talked about this a little bit already, so I won't go super hard on it. But all the questions are required. You can't submit the application unless you answer all of them. You guys will be very upset if you try to. And like I mentioned before, if you're applying for both SAFEPLAN and VSS, which does occur at times, we do know that the answers to the questions may vary based on the program. So just answer it specific to the application that you're filling out at that time. And then again, we have the core coverage agreement. It will not be in our example today because we're using CSVS, but I did want to include a screenshot of what that looks like. The structure has not changed over the past number of years. You'll just fill out the courts that you're responsible for covering, what that core coverage agreement looks like using the columns that you see here. I know it's probably small for you, so I can read what these entail. It says court coverage, proposed staffing, including staffing, even I can't read it, days/hours and FTE, court schedule, including days and hours, backup coverage, and list some examples of what that backup could look like, and then any notes. Similar to the budget line items, and we'll talk about that more in a minute, you can use this green plus button to make more rows if you need to, and then when there are more rows, there's also a red negative button you can use to delete rows if you need to. So that's the court coverage agreement. And now we get into the budget request. So I'm going to move again from the screenshots into the actual application because we'll be filling it out as an example together. So the first thing I'm going to do, and this is actually a question that comes up a lot because it's not super intuitive, but as you're looking at the forms here, you see application questions, organizational questionnaire, indirect tool form, which we'll talk about, that's new. But you're not seeing the budget and you're like, where's the budget I'm supposed to fill out? Am I somewhere wrong? Did I do something incorrect? Like, what's going on? This is a question I get often. So the reason you won't see that for CSVS and VSS is that in order for the correct forms to appear, you need to select your match waiver option because the forms will be different if you're reporting match. SAFEPLAN, this isn't relevant for you because match is automatically built in unless you email me and tell me you don't want it built in, but match waiver is automatically built in rather. So for our purposes, because this is what the majority of applicants do, we're going to accept the full match waiver. I'm going to save the page and then you'll see the budget forms pop up here. If I'd selected the other one, you would still get budget forms, but you would have match columns because you would have to fill out the match information because that's what you selected. We will see that the narrative question is required. I'm not going to fill that out together. I'm just going to put not any, don't do this. But this is just to satisfy the form. So now we're going to go into the salary page. And this looks the same for everyone, for all three grants rather. So what you're seeing here, I'm very excited to share, is a new format for the salary page. So I'm going to make it smaller so we can see the whole screen, but then I'll make it bigger so we can look at the different sections. So this looks different than what we're used to. So like I said, I made it smaller so you can see the whole thing. But some of the things that are similar that you've seen before are these questions at the top. How many hours per week is full-time at your agency? You can see I've tested 40 a number of times. So we're just going to put that in as a test. And then as you input staff members here with the relevant information, the FTE number, will auto-populate for number of full-time equivalents total, and then also per staff member. That is not changing, but it's a cool function that we added last year. I want to make sure that everyone knows what's happening with those numbers. So now what we're seeing here is different from even your current budgets for FY25. We have a whole section that's a line item. Previously, as you're probably familiar with, because the FY25 applications look this way, it used to be just this top line here, name, category, title, etc. So this would be one line, and then you would have the narrative, the second line, at the bottom. And there's this weird like function where you had to fill everything out on the top first before you could fill out the bottom, and it would delete things on the bottom if you like didn't do it in the the correct order, and obviously none of that makes sense. So we've updated this to make more sense. And so as you are filling this out, you have one section to fill out for each line item. And we're seeing it with the salary page, but it'll be like that for every single page. And instead of just making more singular lines, we'll make entire new sections for each staff member. And again, this will be the same for all the other budget categories. So I did want to zoom out again so we could see these plus and negative buttons and see the whole section, because most of us, including myself, will zoom in so we can actually read it, which I cannot do from this distance. But a question I get frequently is if I am zoomed super far in, I can't see these plus negative buttons. It looks like this. And you're like, what am I working with? I don't really understand it. I need to add more staff members. Completely fair. One thing you could do is do what I did and minimize the screen so you can see more. Or there's a bar at the bottom. Sorry, I have a sharing screen bar too, so it's also in the way. But there's a bar here at the bottom you can scroll back and forth with to see the whole thing. This is probably the preferred method because you still want to be able to read it, even if it's on the right side of the page. But these are a couple of tools I wanted to point out because it's not super intuitive and it's a question we get a lot. So I'm going to fill out some test information because we will be talking about other pieces of the application that are relevant to the budget. So we're just going to input my cat's name as per usual. So Izzy is the president of Cats for Justice. She works 2 hours per week at 52 weeks. She makes $2,000 over that year. Sorry, that's like not accurate at all. That's what my imagination says. Admin, she's employed 40 hours per week for, let's say, 100,000, which I know is also crazy and unrealistic, but I'm gonna daydream. And then I'm gonna put VAWA funding is the other component. And so I'm going to do a second one. Boop, my other cat, he is a full-time clinician. So I'm going to say clinician. He works full-time at Cats for Justice, which is the 40 hours that I input before. You can see that this number is changing as we go as well. So 52 weeks, and he makes, again, I'm being optimistic and saying $75,000 per year, and he's direct. So we also see the FTE numbers being updated as we put these numbers in. And then he's employed full-time and makes that 75 completely funded by MOVA. And then I'm going to delete this extra one. I'm just going to do the 2. So we see everything reflected here in the totals. We see the FTE per line reflected and then the FTE total. I'm going to save and then move on. I'm also going to show the fringe page because we'll see that the base amount requested that I just input for Izzy and Boop are what has been copied over. If for some reason one of these employees is not receiving fringe benefits, you can delete it and it'll be fine. If you need additional fringe benefits, you can also do this. So I'm going to do this for example. I'm going to put $10,000 at 10%. I'm going to put the 10% in. eGrants will auto-calculate what that looks like. It will not let you request more than the calculation, so make sure that you're putting in the numbers that you need to make it work. 200, and I'm just going to complete. I'm going to say admin for all of this, and then pretend that this is accurate, but I'm just going to put not any for them. All right, so I'm going to save. And as you see, again, we have the whole section, the line item and the budget narrative together. Oh, it doesn't like what I put. Oh, it's the eGrants is doing its job. I put too many zeros in this 7,500. So we're going to correct that. So adding and deleting full sections. Hopefully I've explained that in a way that is not confusing. I like this update. I hope you all do as well. So we worked through 2 of the budget pages together. It would take all day if I went through and put realistic examples in all of them. So let's pretend that I did Know that even if you don't have one or more of these categories, you do have to go in and save the page. So eGrants knows that you're intentionally not putting information in. So I'll just do this for consultants, for example. But if I tried to submit right now, pretending I completely filled out the other sections, eGrants would not be happy because I have not gone into each of these. So just note that that is important. So the next thing I'm going to call attention to on eGrants is another new feature I'm super excited for, and I hope you're excited for as well, is this indirect tool. It might be called indirect cost tool in other places, indirect tool form, basically same thing. So what the indirect cost tool is going to do is be an optional tool if you are looking to request indirect expenses. This can help do the math for you. Indirect, as you probably know, has been a focus of MOVA, is just making sure we fully understand it, what your requests are, what your needs are, how your math is working. As the cognizant agency for de minimis specifically, we'll talk more about those, the CFR changes in a minute. But this tool, you can see what has happened with our example, is that eGrants has pulled over the staff members and the miscellaneous fringe, because that wasn't associated with the staff member, totaled up their salary and fringe for us. And then if you want to, let me zoom this in because it might be a little difficult to see. So it totaled up the salary and fringe for the staff members and just pulled over the miscellaneous fringe that I had requested in fringe. And so we have that information here. You can input your indirect rate. So there's 10% here, but let's say I'm going to do 15 because we're using the new de minimis rate. What you can do is select the line items you want included in your indirect rate calculation. So let's pretend we're using the new de minimis, we're using 15%, and we want to include all of these costs would be eligible for the new de minimis. So we would include all of them. We would get the eligible indirect request here. We also get the indirect base, so the MTDC, modified total direct cost, if you're using de minimis, or just normal indirect, not normal, I guess federal or other indirect rates that aren't de minimis. So you would get the base, you would input your indirect rate, and then you would get the math done for you. So hopefully this is something, again, not required at all. It's not going to yell at you if you don't use it, if you don't click into it. It shouldn't. If it does, let me know. But not required at all. This is just a tool to help all of us sort of understand what our indirect calculations are, what we're eligible for, what we're including in that math, and all of that. So this will not be used anywhere else. You can see if I click into indirect cost, let me go ahead and save it so it doesn't go away. If we click into indirect costs, we're not seeing any of this information copy over. So you don't have to be scared about using the tool either. You can use it to play around with your budget, see what you might be able to fit in. And like that, I saved it, but let me zoom out. But you're seeing this is a completely empty page. We haven't put any information in. It's not copying over from the indirect tool. So that's just another new function that we have in all three applications that you can use. If you have questions about that, of course, feel free to reach out or input into the Q&A. I'd be happy to chat more about it. All right, so that's enough of the eGrants demo for a minute. We're going to go back to the slides. We already talked about the budget request. We talked about the indirect cost tool. So now we're going to talk more specifically about indirect costs. As many of you probably already know, the 2 CFR Part 200 was updated officially or put into place on October 1st, 2024. We've been doing a lot of work with this, but one of the big takeaways, as I've mentioned before, is that those who elect to use the de minimis rate, who are eligible for the de minimis rate, can use up to 15%. So that's why I use 15% in our example, indirect cost tool rate. I know in the chat, Kristen will be inputting the new information about the 2 CFR Part 200 and some of our resources. Like I said, we've done a lot of work on this already, so feel free to check that out in the chat. Indirect, as you can tell, because I've done all this talking about it the past 10 minutes or so, remains an allowable cost, but is also not required. So go ahead and refer to our policies and procedures document when requesting indirect if you have additional questions about eligibility and what that might mean for you. All right, so then the last part of the application, or rather specifically, see, this is why it's important because I almost forgot the contact information. The last part of the budget is to click into the budget summary page and make sure it reflects what you want it to reflect. So when eGrants loads, you'll see that the check mark is here. You'll see our request in here and everything is good. If it's not good, go back into the cost category that looks a little wonky and go ahead and fix that. Every time you make a change to any of the cost categories, the budget summary needs to be clicked back into. Excuse me, or else eGrants will yell at you. We do, like I said, sorry, we're going to go back and forth based on the different pieces that we talk about. So because we're using CSVS as an example and no CSVS applicants are pass-throughs, they won't be seeing an upload section, but if you are VSS, you will see the upload section. If you are pass-through, that's where you would input your subaward information. If you have questions about that, again, please don't hesitate to reach out. And then we get to contact information. Like I say here, your application will be considered incomplete if the contact information is not completed and up to date. So I'm going to go back into eGrants and show us how to get there. We have some screenshots here, but I think an actual demo will be helpful as well. So contact information, like I mentioned before, does not exist within the application. It exists within your organization's profile. So to get there, what you'll do is go up here to where I just went with the green box. Your name will be here, not this, random test name that I have. And then you'll click into profile. You will want to navigate away from the application because it's not in the application. And then, mine looks wonky because this is the test site, but you'll have your organization name here. Let's say this is Cats for Justice. And then you'll have these 4 options. Down here at the bottom, you'll see contact information. That's where you're going to want to go to fill out the information that we need. So in contact information, you'll see, oh, that's a bad example. This one is not open. Yours should be open. So I'll go into this one. Yes, this one's open. And you can tell if it's open or not. It will be, I promise. If you can't click into it and if it's grayed out, that means it's not open. If that does occur, reach out to your program coordinator and they can open it for you. But they should all be open at this point. You'll see that eGrants is angry that it's not completely filled out. So these are the contacts that need to be included. We have agency leadership contact, programmatic contact, fiscal contact, contract manager, data contact, additional if there's another person that doesn't fit into any of these categories up above, they can be listed here. This is not required, but sometimes there's a need for additional people to be included. And then we have my beloved authorized signatory section. So this is the next slide. I am going to zoom in so we can look at it together. The authorized signatory section is, as you can see, part of the contact information form. Super, super important. This is the information that allows the contract, when we get to that point in contracting, to be sent to you all. So the way this works is that there's this contractor authorized signatory listen form, this CASL form. It will look like this. You will fill it out with your information here and then input at minimum 1 person that will sign the contract. And then we'll need it signed, of course. You'll upload it back into eGrants in this section here. What you see in this example is quite accurate to what you should see in your current organization information and contact information. This should already be filled out from FY25 contracting. We did not delete anything. This exists continuously because it's not connected to the application. So your job is to make sure, download what you uploaded last year and make sure that it reflects the accurate person that you need to sign the contract when we get to the spring and we're doing contracting. So that's part 1. Make sure that the person that you need to sign the contract is in your current upload. I know some have even changed since we did contracting. So I think it's super important just to make sure that it reflects who you need it to be. The second piece is that the person listed here needs to be in this contract. So I have Izzy Smith, our president of Cats for Justice, in the authorized, or in the castle and the contractor authorized signatory listing form. If I just have Oop in here and Izzy signs, that doesn't count. Izzy needs to be up here as one of the authorized signatories. We have done a lot of work, hopefully, to make this a little bit clearer. It's not like the most intuitive process. Please reach out if you have questions about who should be in the sign, or who should be in this form, who should be signing, who should be in e-grants. This will expedite the contracting process and lead to less confusion and not hold up your funds when we do contracting, if this is done the way we need it to be done during the application process. So that is the authorized signatory listing section and the contact information section. So definitely make sure that you click save when you're done. eGrants will not be mad once you fill out all of the information, and you'll get a happy checkbox and not an angry error explanation point for contact information. All right, so then the last thing you will do after you do the contact information is submit your application. I didn't fill out the entire application, so the example will not work. But when you scroll down the left-hand panel on your application, you'll see the status options section. You'll see application canceled and application submitted. Of course, if you want to submit your application, you'll want to click the application submitted button. If there are things missing, you'll get an error message, similar to some of the ones we've already seen today. If your application has all of the information filled out and eGrants is happy, you'll see a message that says this. I know it might be small for you, but it basically says, are you sure you want to change the status of your application from application in process to application submitted? You'll click OK, and then it'll auto refresh you to the document landing page where you can see if the status has been changed. You will also get an email. Sometimes it takes about 15 minutes for that email to send, so it's not my favorite, but it does exist, it should exist. But you can always check the application status. That will be the most accurate piece of information for verifying if it's been submitted. All right, I've been talking for a long time. That is everything eGrant, so I'm going to pass it over to Kristen Tavano to talk about the last components of the application.
Thanks, Ashley. So here on this slide, we have some of our evaluation criteria, and we just want to note that our evaluation system is an evaluative tool only, and it's not wholly determinative of which agencies are awarded renewal grants. We make a best value determination, excuse me, and we reserve the right to apply additional evaluation criteria in decision making, and we reserve the right to negotiate budgets with successful applicants. A best value determination means it's in the best value of the Commonwealth for evaluation criteria to measure factors beyond cost. So as we've done in previous years, we'll be doing an initial review of applications, followed by a review of the criteria you see on the screen prior to making our funding recommendations to the Victim and Witness Assistance Board. A full list of all of our evaluation criteria can be found on page 9 of the SAFEPLAN RGA and on page 10 of the VSS RGA. And so, as in past years, we'll be considering information in our review and evaluation of the renewal grants, such as agency history of reversion and agency history of vacancies. And as a reminder, we seek to ensure that all subrecipients and their subrecipients comply with all applicable laws regarding civil rights and non-discrimination. Next slide. Thank you. And we are going to kick off some of our frequently asked questions. I believe Kristen Wen is going to take our first one.
Thank you both. So for our first question, we have, must the budget in the FY26 application be exactly equal to the FY25 award amount? So all applicants that are applying for renewal funding can apply up to their FY25 award amount. but that could also be less than your FY25 award amount. Really where this is restricted is expecting that applicants are not applying for more than your FY25 award amount. So it could be equal or less to what you're currently funded.
Okay, so this one is back to me. The question is, as outlined in the RGAs and or CSVS application guide, MOVA has provided a range of total available funding between 10% less than fiscal year 25 awards and 3.42% more than fiscal year 25 awards. What does this mean? So as in prior years, our funding ranges reflect the total funding we have available for all awards and not the potential changes that may be seen in individual award amounts. Kristen discussed these ranges in a prior slide. And as Leah mentioned earlier in the presentation, this does not mean that your agency will automatically receive a 10% decrease or an almost 4% increase. The evaluation criteria that I just talked about will impact the adjustment to your specific award amount. And a final note that final award ranges and individual awards are dependent on our funding availability at the time of award.
The next question that we received, do we have to complete the application in one sitting? The answer to this is no. You do not have to complete it in one sitting. You can save what you have completed in eGrants so far and return to it as many times as you need prior to submitting the application. Applicants and other users with the correct permissions in eGrants can navigate back to the application using the search tool. And if you require any technical assistance on that end, Ashley is your go-to person with eGrants.
Question is, I received an error on eGrants that says I must name my line items uniquely. What does this mean? So eGrants is working behind the scenes and it's doing a lot of formula checking, auto-populating, auto-calculating, error checking. And because of that, each line item that you're entering in the funding request must have a unique name. So if, for example, you're in the consultants category and you have Sarah Smith listed as a clinical consultant and a workshop consultant, you don't want to have Sarah Smith, just Sarah Smith, in two different line items. You need to have a little bit of information that kind of differentiates those two lines. So for example, you could do Sarah Smith Clinical in one line item and then Sarah Smith Workshops in the second line item, and that would fix that error that eGrants is throwing at you.
When I initiate the application, I do not see the budget forms. How can I fix this? So as I had alluded to earlier, the culturally specific grant services and the VSS applicants, you will first have to answer that match waiver question in eGrants if you choose to opt in or out of the blanket match waiver, and then save the page before the budget becomes available to you. So this wouldn't be applicable to SAFEPLAN organizations. You should be able to automatically see the budget forms. But the reason that this is because eGrants will open different budget forms depending on how you, if you're accepting the match waiver or not. If you do opt into not receiving the blanket match waiver, you will have to expand in the budget as to what categories you will be reporting match in. So please make sure you're answering that question first.
Where can I access and update my contact information in eGrants? The contact information section in eGrants is not located within the application. It's located within your agency information. So in order to access contact information from wherever you are in the eGrants system, and I don't know if maybe this will be a better demo, Ashley, if you think this isn't covering it, but you can click on your name in the green box in the upper right-hand corner of your screen and click profile. So your individual, like your personal name in the upper right-hand corner is in a green box and you can click on profile. From there, you'll be taken to the person information page, which consists of your eGrants profile information. And in the left-hand panel of that section, there's a tab titled Contact Information. And from there, that's where you will fill out and be sure to save your contact information.
I think that was our last, yes, our last written question. There are a number of open questions in the Q&A function that I would like to address, and also to clarify some pieces of what will be evaluated in the grant. So there's a lot of questions around the bonuses piece. So let me read some of these questions out loud, and a lot of them are similar, so I can respond to both. I think these two questions are similar. You mentioned that bonuses must be added to the original grant renewal. Our organization often has salary increases that we don't know about until after the application has been entered. How will MOVA handle these budget changes? So then there's also a similar question related to bonuses/raises. As with bonuses, we will need to include annual performance increases in the original budget. And is this a separate line item? So Kristen, Ashley, correct me if you think this is wrong, but the way we're looking at bonuses versus raises is different. So I wouldn't consider a raise necessarily a bonus. Raises continue and are currently allowable, and they will be allowed throughout FY26 as well. What we're really looking to avoid is at the tail end of the fiscal year, bonuses being added to the budget in order to spend down the grant funding. If there is funding that is left over. So raises can be incorporated at the time of application if performance evaluations and raises take place after the time of application. That would be allowable, and it could be submitted through a budget amendment in eGrants to your program coordinator. So I would just clarify mainly that bonuses and raises from our perspective would be defined differently. But we can certainly clarify that in any Q&A questions and answers that we release. In addition, when we update the policies and procedures, we can define what the difference is from the grants perspective looks like.
I know there's a number of other questions in here, which I would love for you all to answer, but there is one that I think Kristen Devano is typing an answer to, but I want to voice because I'm seeing it now. Sorry about this. The application is due February 4th. We have had to change that date a couple of times, which is why you're seeing it a little bit inconsistently. It is February 4th at noon via eGrants. So when I post these slides, I will update this, and then the timeline before also had like FY24 instead of FY26 in it. So I'll fix those things and make sure that's accurate. But thank you for calling attention to that. I imagine there are many people confused by that inconsistency.
Thanks, Ashley. One question too, will rent continue to be fully funded by MOVA as a line item? So rent would be allowable to request in the FY26 renewal. To say if it's going to be fully funded by MOVA it's hard to say at this point in time. I think, of course, we'll have to go through the funding evaluations and grant recommendations to the Victim and Witness Assistance Board. So it's hard to say if it will be fully funded, but you can include it in the application. And then another question too that came in, is there a cap for staff salary or hours for administrative staff, such as executive director positions? So there isn't necessarily a cap for executive director or leadership types of positions and administrative hours. However, the grant policies restrict positions such as the executive director from being funded full-time by VOCA specifically, and we apply those same rules to the state funding that we receive. So I think if this is like a programmatic specific question, you can reach out to us and we can clarify, like, if it's close to the full-time hours, like if this is something we may question, and what that may look like for your program specifically.
We also have a question in the chat. Since timely submission is a criteria for grant renewal, does a very early submission date influence the decision or the amount of the award? No, it does not.
Thanks, Kristen. May an organization use funding for mortgage payments in lieu of lease payments if an organization will own their space in the upcoming fiscal years? Unfortunately, no. Mortgage payment is not allowed per federal requirements. And at this point in time, we are only looking at federal funding for FY26. Hopefully we will have a braided funding model moving forward, and we'll receive state funding. But as I mentioned, we apply all of the same grant rules to every funding stream that we administer at MOVA. So unfortunately, that is something we would not be able to support.
There's another question here. Will MOVA consider allowing reversion of funds at the end of fiscal year 26 and not penalizing organizations who do this? Because of the timing when we'll be doing grant reviews and funding recommendations, we won't know exactly how much an agency will be reverting at the end of fiscal year 26. So part of our evaluation criteria is considering the history of reversion for fiscal years 23 and 24, and then progress towards spending the fiscal year 25 award. We're going to be doing our grant reviews in February and March, so we'll be looking at spending up until that point and anticipated spending for the rest of the year.
There's another question here that asks, my favorite question, where's the castle located again in eGrants? So I will take this liberty to go into eGrants again and show where that is located. I think that's a question that comes up a lot, so I do want to call attention to it. So let me make sure we can all see this. I did make it smaller. I'm closing the few things so I can see too. So we are in the contact information location, but I'm going to go home just so we can like start from scratch. So if you're in an application or if you're anywhere else on the site, you can start from here or the dashboard or anywhere else. So you'll click on your name. So this would say like Izzy Smith, Sarah Smith, whatever. You would click profile. You are taken to your personal page, which is not where the contact information is, but there's this left-hand panel. Again, you'll only have one organization, your organization. You're seeing two here because test site, we're testing multiple things. I'm going to use this test one as our example. There's 4 different pages you can click into. You can see them for funsies if you want to, but the contact information page is the one you're going to want to go to. You'll fill out all the contact information, and at the very bottom, if you scroll down, you'll see the authorized signatory section. Here, we have linked the CASEL form, which you can click and then it'll automatically download like we see here, right? And then you can download it, fill it out, etc., and re-upload it here. If you have done or if you're familiar with the contracting process over the past couple of years, it functions very similarly where we link the form that you need to fill out. You click download, fill out, and then re-upload into the designated section, which would be right here.
We currently do not have any other open questions in the chat. So I think if anybody has any remaining questions on their minds, please feel free to drop them in the Q&A while we're still online. Otherwise, as far as next steps go, I wanted to share, I know at the beginning, Liam had talked a little bit about the work that we're doing with root cause in the listening sessions to really kind of understand moving forward beyond FY26, how we can strategically plan our funding and prioritization of our funding with funding reductions. Many of you probably, to those who are on our constant contact list, have likely seen the announcements and the listening sessions in those dates. I did want to just drop the registration form in the chat to encourage you to register if you haven't already. We are almost at capacity for the virtual sessions, and I would really like to put a plug in for attending the in-person sessions. Both sessions will be great and facilitated by Root Cause, but I think in person just tends to have lively conversation. So we're really encouraging the registration there, and especially since the virtual sessions are starting to fill up quicker. So the registration form is in the chat. There are a few different dates to choose from. In the next one, the first one is happening this Thursday, and that one is virtual, but mainly they will be occurring in January come the new year. But we're really looking forward to everybody's participation in that. Really encourage you to register if you haven't. We actually got a question about that. Should only one person from each organization attend? We've seen registration, so we're not requiring or telling programs that only one person per organization should or can attend. I think because of the limitations of how many people can attend each session, we're really trying to cap it around like 40-ish people per session. So yes and no. We have seen a lot of folks from the same organization register for sessions, but if you bring different perspectives into the room, it could be helpful to have multiple people at the organization, whether you're coming from the provider perspective or the survivor perspective. So it's really ultimately up to you, but we are not capping one person per agency, if that helps.
Kristen, there's another question in the chat. For the listening sessions, do you have a list of questions we should consider ahead of time?
Yeah, so just to clarify for the listening sessions too, so the sessions will be facilitated by the consulting organization that we're working with, Root Cause. So they will be sending out a confirmation email 1 to 2 days prior to the listening session with some additional information. So that will include like the logistics, a brief agenda, and some other kind of topics to think about prior to the session. So you will be hearing from a staff member at Root Cause with that information a few days before the session that you're registered for.
We are exhausted of questions right now. We'll give it another 30 seconds to a minute to see if there's any lingering. We do have, the space until noon. We're not going to stay that long, but please don't hesitate to send questions now or over email later as they come to you.
And I put in the chat a link to our current FAQ document. Ashley is going to be taking all of the questions from the webinar today and anything that comes in via email weekly and posting new versions for all 3 of the grant renewals, typically on Fridays, but at least once a week.
Yeah, this recording, the slides we walked through together, and the most updated Q&A documents from the questions we just got right now. The goal is to have all of those posted on our website and on Combis for the relevant applicant or RGAs by the end of the week. And then, like Kristen said, weekly, the holidays, but weekly-ish is when we'll be updating that question list so that everything is reflected. January 27th is the last day questions can be submitted. We'll have the final list posted no later than the 28th of January. Application deadline February 4th at noon. I'm not seeing any other questions.
I just want to clarify I answered a couple of questions. We had a couple of questions about applying, how much they could apply for in 26. And my answer was yes, that you should apply up to your fiscal year 25 award amount, which includes VOCA funding, but I left out a very important word. So you should apply up to your total fiscal year 25 award amount, which includes VOCA bridge funding. That's what happens when you're answering questions and bouncing back and forth. So I clarified that in there, but I just wanted to make sure that everybody heard that extra word.
Yeah, so if for programs, if you received an award amendment, once we received the timing was really odd this year. So I know many programs, just to elaborate, Kristen, on what you're saying, many programs received their first award in the spring, and then we didn't learn about the Boca Bridge until like end of August, close to September. So if you received an award amendment in the summertime, so post Boca Bridge, that would be the amount that we are allowing programs to reapply up to. So thank you, Kristen, for clarifying that.
I think that's everything though. We can go ahead and end the session and you'll see all of this updated on the website soon.
Thank you, everyone. Happy holidays.
Happy holidays, everyone. Thank you.